بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه. Welcome back everyone to another lecture. Inshallah, in today's class we will take the entire section of the different types of food. So we will learn what, other than what we said yesterday about the Arabs at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, other than that sort of general introduction, we're going to get into the specifics. What are the rules for how we can determine if an animal or a bird is permissible for us to eat, in which case it would have to be slaughtered, and what is excluded from that. Part of this conversation, and this is going to be a little graphic, is that he gets in, or in this part of the discussion, we get into the details of what happens if you are in extreme situations and you can't find halal food. What is the extent of what you can eat that's not halal? I mean, of course, ad-darurat tubih al-mahdhurat, the qa'da, the principle is that extreme situations render that which is impermissible to be permissible. We know that. But there's a very interesting level of discussion that talks about, even to the extent, of cannibalism. And it's a little graphic, but one of the benefits of this discussion is it shows the importance of the preservation of life. So despite the rules of what's halal and not halal and haram to eat, we also need to know the extent of how we have to preserve our life. And it's actually quite interesting, the examples. And then towards the end of that, we'll learn that there are two things that are on slaughter that are permissible, such as fish and locusts. So we need to define what fish is. And then the two types of blood that are lawful, liver and spleen. I mean, that's pretty straightforward. Liver and spleen is fine. Those four would be an exception. Okay, and then following that, we will take the very beginning section of the next discussion, which is offering sacrifices, the udhiyah, the qurbani, which is a confirmed sunnah for us, but it was wajib for the Prophet. It's one of his khasa'is. So we'll talk a little bit about the introductory notes about that topic, but we won't get, because of the way the pages are, we won't get further into that discussion. But we learn about sort of where it comes from, the time that it's permissible, who it's obligatory for, some of those general introductions as we usually have, and then we'll punt the discussion, the full discussion of it, for the next clip. Okay, so that's the game plan for this lecture, and inshallah we'll begin this journey together in the next clip. All right, let's begin the way we normally begin, which is to turn to the text itself, the original text of the Matn of Abi Shuja'. قال المصنف رحمه الله ونفعنا بعلومه في الدارين آمين ويحرم من السباع ما له ناب قوي يعد به ويحرم من الطيور ما له مخلب قوي يجرح به ويحل للمضطر في المخمصة أن يأكل من الميتة المحرمة ما يسده به رمقه. ولنا ميتتان حلالان السمك والجراد ودمان حلالان الكبد والطحال فصل في الأضحية والأضحية سنة مؤكدة. Okay, he says, rahimahullah, Qadi Abu Shuja', he says, may Allah Ta'ala have mercy on him, and may we benefit from his knowledge in this world and in the next. Wrong section. Predatory land animals that have strong fangs are used for injuring prey and are unlawful to eat. Predatory birds that have strong talons used for wounding are unlawful. It is permissible for someone on the verge of starvation to consume meat from an animal that has not been properly slaughtered, and it is unlawful to consume to the extent necessary to preserve life. No, it should be it's lawful. Let me read that sentence again. Sorry. It is permissible for someone on the verge of starvation to consume meat from an animal that has not been properly slaughtered, and it is lawful to consume to the extent necessary to preserve life. So that's a mistake in the translation. Let me just make a correction there. No matter how many times I teach this, I always find these mistakes later on, which probably means I didn't do a good job teaching it the first time. Two types of unslaughtered flesh are lawful for us: fish and locusts. Two types of blood are lawful for us: liver and spleen. Offering sacrifices, offering an animal sacrifice and udhiyah is an emphasized sunnah. All right, let me get the dalil, see if there's anything worth pointing out for today's discussion before we jump into the actual commentary on what we read. Bukhari and Muslim narrate on the authority of Abi Thalaba that the Prophet ﷺ forbade from eating the predatory animal that has the claws, the retractable claws. How is he translating that? Strong fangs. Afwan, strong fangs. Same thing with the birds. That's narrated in Muslim on the authority of Ibn Abbas. As far as the exception for extreme circumstances, this comes in Al-Ma'idah verse 3. فَمَنِ اضْطُرَّ فِي مَخْمَصَةٍ مُتَجَانِفٍ لِإِثْمٍ فَإِنَّ اللَّهَ غَفُورٌ. Whoever is in a state of ittirar, a state of necessity, in losing one's life, then the previous list of things that are haram to eat are permissible to consume as to sustain life. As far as the fish, Ibn Umar narrates, and this is in Ibn Majah, that the Prophet ﷺ said, أُحِلَّتْ لَنَا مَيْتَتَانْ وَدَمَانْ, that two unslaughtered things and two bloods are permissible for us, and then he gives the list. And then the Nahar, the Udhiyah, we have Surah Al-Kawthar, فَصَلِّ لِرَبِّكَ وَانْحَرْ. Okay, not so much of the Adillah. I think there are some in the Hashia that will be of relevance when we get to them. Okay, so now we took in yesterday's lecture, we talked about the things that are permissible to eat and not permissible to eat as determined by the Arabs, the pre-Islamic Arabs and the Arabs at the time of the advent of the Prophet ﷺ. And then now we're going to get into another level of detail. So he says, predatory land animals that have strong fangs used for injuring prey are unlawful, versus animals that have not strong fangs. So the not strong fanged predatory animal is the hyena, which is the exception that you will find in the books of fiqh. Ad-Daba. Now, of course, one of the famous examples of what we can't eat is a lion, al-asad. And on the asad, one of the names of the asad is Usama, which is a man's name. Actually, one of my teachers is named Sheikh Usama, Hafidhahullah. And Ibn Khaliway, the linguist, he said that there are over 500 names for lion in the Arabic language. And Ali ibn Ja'far added 130 to that list, making the total 630 names. Now, why is this significant? Well, it's significant because to show the richness of the Arabic language. And if I'm not mistaken, Al-Fayruz Abadi, the famous linguist and author of Al-Qamus, he has a book, I think it's still in manuscript form, in which he compiles these type of words in the Arabic language in which there are hundreds, dozens, if not hundreds of names of synonyms. And that shows you, that's important. If you're going to do a deep dive, as we said yesterday, in the back stuff, in the backward stuff, the Ayyam al-Arab, the history of the Arabs, the Ash'ar al-Arab, the poetry of the Arabs, especially when the Arabic can become obscure. Of course, the Arabic that we learn and the Arabic that we study in the Sharia, it's really like a derivative basically of Qurayshi Arabic. Because that's the language of the Quran, that's the language of the Prophet ﷺ spoken. But that is not the only Arabic. So if you go backwards in time, you will find other types of Arabic. So I highlight that because it's important from a research point of view. There are some words, just to repeat, that have multiple names. And the Arabs, when they found something to be important or lofty or scary or intense, they gave it multiple names. Okay, another thing that is excluded is the elephant. That's I just kind of a little factoid I want to put in. What is the name of the elephant from the story of Abraha? Alam tara kayfa fa'ala rabbuka bi ashabil fil. That famous episode, and this is the year in which the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam was born. The name of that elephant is actually Mahmud. And the hadith says that the rider of that elephant was seen later in the life of the Prophet blind, roaming the streets of Mecca. A very bad ending for trying to destroy the house of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that's just an interesting kind of factoid. It's in the Hashia. And then another thing that he says is interesting, which is excluded, is monkeys. And he says, وهو حيوان ذكي الفطنة سريع الفهم. It's a very intelligent animal, quick to understand. يشبه الإنسان في غالب حالاته, and it's very similar to human beings in many of its conditions. And the reason I highlight, he says, لأنه يضحك, he laughs, ويضرب, he strikes, ويتناول بيده الشيء, he grabs things with his hands that he needs, ويأنس بالناس, and he has companionship with people. And I remember when I was in Uganda, there's an island in Lake Victoria. I can't remember the name of the island, but they rehabilitate chimpanzees, and one of the things that I remember, they were like selling these T-shirts. I think there's some kind of, I don't know if this, I haven't verified this, but saying that the DNA overlap of the chimpanzee with the human being is like 96 or 97%. And the people that believe in that type of evolution, that that we are derived from that, they hold that up as something to prove. Whereas here the fuqaha are like, yeah, it's a very similar to a human being. But I mean, no, that doesn't even occur to them to think that means we're derived from them. It's just that subhanallah, we're similar. On the elephants, he also says that the Hindus, they honor the elephant because it's a mighty animal and it's very powerful. It can live for a long time. So I just bring up these things to show you that the ulama were not siloed off from the world around them. Even though the Hashia that we're reading is from the 19th century, the people still understood that. And the level of travel, actually, another thing is, if you read about a lot of these ulama in the pre-modern world, you'd be shocked how traveled. They're more well-traveled than we are, even though traveling for us is just like that from the point of view of technology, but they were very well-traveled and information traveled with them. Okay, let me pick up the discussion because I see the timer. I'm running out of time. I'll pick it up, inshallah, in the next clip. All right, moving on from elephants and monkeys, let's come back to our senses and get back into the class. And then he says, predatory birds that have strong talons used for wounding are unlawful. So, we don't eat those type of birds, and it would be a derivative of the previous, I think it was yesterday's class or the class before, where I talked about it being impermissible just to kill animals for the sake of killing animals, unless, of course, his life is threatened. Okay, now the next section, which will probably take up the bulk here, is it is permissible for someone on the verge of starvation to consume meat, etc. So let me begin by saying it is permissible. Actually, it is obligatory, and this is a principle I want you to learn. The reason it's obligatory, أنه جواز بعد المنع, when there is something that is forbidden and then it is allowed, that means it is obligatory. So that's a principle, a qaida of fiqh. That's how fiqh is constructed. So even though in the text he says وَيُحِلْ, it's permissible, really what he really means is saying it's obligatory. And that kind of takes us down this path of this tangent that we're about to go on, inshallah, of what that means. So understand, just sort of to paint the picture, that if your life is at risk, you have to do everything that is humanly possible to sustain your life. And if you're with people, the people around you. And as a matter of fact, I would go as far as to say this is a normal human instinct. Any human being in that situation, if their life is literally at risk, the risk of perishing, we have something inside us that instinctively we would try to hold out on our life. And Allah Ta'ala says to that, وَلَا تَلْقُوا بِأَيْدِيكُمْ إِلَى التَّهْلُكَةِ. This is 195 in Al-Baqarah. Do not lead yourselves to halak, to destruction. So, وَلَا تَقْتُلُوا أَنفُسَكُمْ. Do not kill yourselves. This is in Nisa verse 29. And what's interesting is that when people are at that level of life being threatened, all of those type of social and psychological situations like depression, all of that stuff goes out of the way. People just, it's fight or flight. We have an instinct inside our DNA, a marker inside our DNA that wants us to hold on to life. And the Sharia acknowledges that because, I mean, that's how we were created. So therefore, we have the discussion about it being permissible. Now, the first thing is when your life is being threatened, meaning that if you do not take some kind of action, you're going to perish. And there's a level of subjectivity to that. So it's not like you have to get a doctor's note that says, okay, I can eat this unlawful meat or drink this unlawful drink. I mean, you gotta, you just, know it. When you, inshallah, we never feel it. But if you're in that, if anyone's in that situation, they know it. So, and then the situation is you can't find anything that is permissible to eat. So therefore, at that moment, the impermissible becomes permissible. Well, not just the impermissible becomes permissible, it becomes obligatory for you to eat that which is normally impermissible in order to hold off to life. So you see the hierarchy of legal thinking. It goes back then to the maqasid of the Sharia. The first maqsad, I mean, actually, there's actually no agreed upon order of the maqasid, but let's just say that the first meta principle of the Sharia is preservation of life. Well, there you go. So preservation of life will trump all of the smaller points of law. An interesting point is in previous discussion, I mean, I don't think I mentioned this, but I'll mention to you now. If you are forced to eat something that is haram, like swine, or forced to drink something that is alcohol, then the mu'tamad position is that after you do that, you have to try to force yourself to throw it up. But in this case, you don't have to. Even if you start eating something that is regularly haram, or drink something that is regular haram, and then after that something halal appears, even in that situation, the mu'tamid in the madhab is you don't have to cause yourself to throw it up because of the intensity, the extreme dire circumstance that you were in. The default is that you would feed yourself versus others, before others, but you can feed others based on the verse وَيُؤْثِرُونَ عَلَى أَنفُسِهِمْ وَلَوْ كَانَ بِهِمْ خَصَاصَةٌ. They prefer others to themselves even if they themselves are in need. Allah Ta'ala praises, this is in Surah Al-Hashr, verse 9. An exception to this is somebody who is traveling, because the scenario is usually when you're traveling. I mean, you being in this dire straits and finding a pig to eat in your house is very, very unlikely. So the scenario I forgot to mention is that you're traveling. He said the exception to this, and now I hope you can remember back to when we talked about traveling and the jama and the qasr of the prayer, that if you are traveling al-ma'siyah bil safar, if your travel is based on a haram reason, then you would not be able to follow this extreme situation because the whole basis for the travel was haram. That's just something that's also interesting. Okay. In this case also, there is no like priority of like what's the less haram food to eat. Whatever you find, you eat. So you don't have to say, okay, I'll eat the donkey, it's better than the pig, or I'll eat the dog, it's better than the rat. I mean, I said it's going to be graphic. You don't have to do that. This comes from Ash-Shabra Milsi, who was one of the later authorities for us, rahimahullah. We don't mention him much, but his legal points are very brilliant and insights. Okay, now let's go further. He says, I said it's going to be graphic. He says that even if you have to eat a person, even if you have to engage in cannibalism to survive, there was a very famous movie when I was growing up about some kind of school trip, that plane crashed in the mountains somewhere, and many of the people perished. It's a true story, and actually they had to engage in cannibalism to survive. And I remember seeing that as a young, I think I was in high school, and I was just for days and weeks, maybe even months, I was just thinking about how intense of a situation that would be. And I kind of carried that with me until I studied fiqh, and I realized, okay, I mean, yeah, that exists. Sometimes, subhanAllah, these are non-Muslims. I think they were European, and it's just a human thing. We're talking about the human condition. So even if it's to the point where you have to eat somebody to survive, then you have to eat somebody to survive. And then he says, even more than that, let's go further. Even if you have to cut off one of your limbs and eat it to survive. Now, it's like 3, 4, 5 pages of this. Okay? And I'm leaving out a lot of the gory details. I mean, if you think what I said is shocking, wait till you read it. But subhanallah, 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 the importance of the preservation of life. If the situation is so dire that you would have to, you are allowed to, you would have to cut off part of your own body or eat a companion of yours who had passed away and perished in order to survive. Can you see then, therefore, how precious life is and how important life is? This is pervasive throughout Islamic, not just Islamic law, but all aspects of Islam. The preservation of human life, the sanctity. وَلَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ. Allah Ta'ala says we have honored the human being. Not that we have honored the believer. Belief is something extra. Alhamdulillah, Allah Ta'ala has given us that. But can you see then now how important life is itself? How any life in front of you is sacred. Even if the person is asi, even if the person is kafir, even if the person is harbi, an agitator, an enemy of the state, a thief, an adulterer, doesn't matter. The sanctity of human life. That these people, all of us, if we were in, God forbid, may Allah Ta'ala protect us and our families, if we were in this type of dire situation, we would have to do everything that was humanly possible to keep ourselves alive. So one of the reasons, this is not my tangent, this is the Hashiya's tangent, is to show us the importance of that. And then you take enough to survive. Okay, so you're not feasting. You're not going to feast on your friend who has died. Okay, you're not feasting on the pig and getting drunk on the alcohol. You're taking enough just to survive. And most likely, if you were in such a dire situation, there would be only a few things around anyway. So by circumstance, this would be almost all these type of cases, that you would have to ration, like that movie that I think it was called Avalanche, the movie or something, which is, you don't have to see the movie, but at least you can see the story or read about the story. They had to ration the things that they found. So the fiqh says, the darura, the necessity makes the haram permissible, or more legally accurately obligatory, but only as much as is needed. So you're not going to overdo it. Hopefully you get out of that situation soon enough for you to survive. Okay, and about the fish and the blood and stuff like that, the next section, let me pick that up in the next clip, inshallah. Okay, so just where are we? Let's come back to the text. Let me just backtrack. I'll read without commentary. It is permissible for someone on the verge of starvation or the verge of losing life to consume meat from an animal that has not been properly slaughtered, or drink, and is lawful to consume to the extent necessary to preserve life. That's what basically the last clip was dedicated to. Now, 2 types of unslaughtered flesh are lawful for us: fish and locust. Fish for us is defined as that which lives in the sea, which means that if it was brought out from the sea, eventually it would die. It's not amphibious. It can't live by itself outside the sea. Anything from the sea is permissible for us. He says, وَلَا وَعَلَى غَيْرِ سُورَةِ السَّمَكِ الْمَشْهُورِ, even if it does not look like a typical fish, كَأَنْ يَكُونَ عَلَى سُورَةِ الْكَلْبِ أَوْ خَنْزِيرِ, even if it comes out from the ocean looking like a dog or a pig. So for us, it's not the shape of the fish, because there's a lot of weird creatures in the sea. And there's a growing interest for people to explore the depths of the sea. And the argument is that why go to the Mars and other planets and things like that when we have a whole other world beneath us in the seas that is completely unexplored, which is a very rational, I have to say, argument. And there are parts of the sea that are so deep there's no natural light. Anyway, I mean, that's a tangent. But the point is that I follow some of these accounts on social media, and sometimes, and I see some of these images, there's some weird stuff in the sea. I mean, subhanAllah. So look at the vision of the fuqaha. It doesn't matter what the thing coming from the sea looks like. If it can only live in the sea and it comes ashore and it dies, then that's permissible for us to eat. There's no dhabh, there's no slaughtering for that. And then locust. Now, locust is probably where I would draw the line. I don't think I could eat a locust, but there are people that used to and do. But my understanding is that the locust of today have dwindled compared to the locusts in the pre-modern period. I mean, when you read some of the stories about the locusts, there was like an army of locusts. Now, the thing about the locusts, even though I might find it disgusting, but subhanAllah, the Sharia takes into consideration the plight of those that are less fortunate. So the locusts are like flying shrimp. And if they were so prevalent in a certain region or a certain time, it's like free food. So see how also there's a flexibility. Anything from the sea is permissible. The locusts are permissible. There's no dhabah involved. There's no slaughtering involved. And this, one of the hikmas, one of the wisdoms behind this is it shows you how the Sharia it leans towards making things easy for those that are less fortunate. Like the flies that fly into the milk and you or in the food and you dunk it, the hadith that talks about those things also, because if you're living out in the boons or out in the desert, you don't have like a cupboard, you don't have a kitchen, you don't have a refrigerator, the things that we have in modern homes. So therefore, there's flies like flying all around. If that was to, if a fly fell in the soup would make it haram to eat, then I mean, no one would be able to eat in those situations. I mean, I remember when I was in Mauritania and I visited, it's like the flies are everywhere. Like they just sit on the people and on the food. I mean, but you got to eat. So when you experience something like that, you can understand the hikmah. He has a little fa'idah in the hashia, it's worth mentioning, about the different realms and the different kingdoms of land and sea. And he says that Al-Qurtubi narrates a tradition from Umar radiallahu anhu, that the Prophet ﷺ said that Allah Ta'ala has created 1,000, a million, kingdoms, live types of animals, etc., on land, and 600 in the seas. Sorry, I read that wrong. 1,000 on land and 600 in the seas. Now, just a tradition. Of course, there are those who have gone to study those type of kingdoms, and it reminds us when we say Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Allah, praise be to Allah, the Lord of the worlds. Plural, not alam, not one, but alameen, all the worlds. All of these are in Allah Ta'ala's dominion. And then he says, Rahimahullah, 2 types of blood are lawful for us, the liver and the spleen. I think that that's straightforward. Again, some people don't like that kind of stuff, but it's also something that is flexible for those that are less fortunate. Okay, so we know that we have to slaughter the animal. Then we know that if we can, that's the default by cutting the throat. Then we know that if we can't capture the animal, we can injure it until it dies. And then we also know that we can hunt. Those are the main ways that we procure the food. We talked about what types of food we can eat, what types of food we can't eat. And we had this long kind of tangent for about a whole lecture about extreme circumstances. I'm sorry that it's graphic, but it's fiqh and there's no hayat, there's no modesty, or nothing is off the table when we come to learn the deen, and that's something that is important to mention. Okay, now the next section is about the udhiyah. I'm not really going to read from the text, so let me get my bookmark here and put the book away. But just to talk about the sunnah of it, this was something that was obligatory for Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But for us, it's a sunnah mu'akkada, and it is disliked in the madhab to not do the udhiyah in the days of Eid without reason. So, like zakatul fitr, if you have enough for your own family, the night before Eid al-Fitr, you have to pay the zakah on each person in the house. We talked about that in the zakah book, in the chapter of zakah. Likewise, in the madhab, if you come to the day of the Nahr, and then the following days, the ayam al-tashriq of the Eid, of Dhul Hijjah, the day of the Eid. Afwan, ayam al-tashriq of the Hajj, which of the first day is the Eid, and you have enough for yourself, then you should slaughter or have someone slaughter on your behalf. And this is something that the Prophet ﷺ did himself, and this comes in the Sunan of At-Tirmidhi that's narrated by our mother, Sayyidah Aisha radiallahu anha alayhi salam, that the Prophet ﷺ sacrificed himself. And there's sort of the detail of how he did that, and the detail of the animal that he used to do that. So this is something that he himself showed us how to do, and indeed he himself did it with his own blessed hands, alayhi salatu wassalam. So after these details will come later, but after the prayer of Eid, and we've had enough time to do the 2 rak'ahs of Eid and then the khutbah, then that's when we do the we do the nahar, we do this the udhiyah, in addition to the 3 days of tashriq, the days and the nights of the tashriq until the final end of it. Of course, the animals that are required for this will come later. I don't want to jump ahead of myself. Um, okay, so a man can do it himself. A woman, the sunnah is to have someone else do it for her. If you don't know how to do it, I mean, I don't know how to do it myself, so I just pay somebody to do it, which is not something that I boast. It's just a fact, and it's something that we should learn how to do because it's a sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. There is also the sunnah of, if you are going to do the sacrifice, that while you are waiting those 10 days of Dhul Hijjah to do that, you don't cut your nails, you don't trim your beard, you kind of mimic the people that are in the Hajj. Because when you go to Hajj, it's kind of rough situation. It's not like a pretty thing. Like after a day, you're sweaty, you're tired, you're out of your element. If you're a man, you're wearing the ihram, which like after an hour of wearing the ihram, you're like, okay, this is not fun. This is I got to stay like this for a couple of days now, and so you kind of put yourself in that situation. It's a sunnah, it's not a fard. And then you go out to do the sacrifice, and then you clean yourself up. It's also one of the sunnahs that we don't want to forget to mention that comes in the books of fiqh. If you deputize somebody to do the udhiyah, the sunnah is for you to watch them do it. And this also comes from the hadith that the Prophet, let me see if he lists, this is in the Mustadrak, I guess, of Al-Hakim, that the Prophet ﷺ told his daughter, Lady Fatima alayhi salam, قومي إلى أضحيتك فأشهديها. Come, O Fatima alayhi salam, and look at your udhiyah, so you can witness it. So that's also a sunnah. So you kind of like partake in it. Yeah, I mean, those are really the introductory things. I mean, if I step any more into the topic, we're gonna get too far. Okay, so then let me get the book back again. So this will take us then to the sacrifices, in which we'll talk about the type of animals that are sacrificed that's fulfill the udhiyah, and then the defective animals, and then the time of doing it. And then after that, there will be the recommended actions of slaughtering, and then the aqiqah, the slaughtering of the newborn. I have some things I want to teach you about that are not in the book. Yeah, and then that will probably take us to the end, inshallah. Wallahu ta'ala a'la wa a'lam. Wa sallallahu ala sayyidina wa mawlana Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Alhamdulillah, in today's lecture, we were able to talk about the definition of the type of predatory animals that we are not allowed to eat, and the type of predatory birds that we're not allowed to eat, which is like another layer of definition from the definition we were visited with in the yesterday's lecture about what the Arabs found good or disgusting. And then the real main kind of heart of today's lecture was about this issue of dire circumstances. If your life is about to go, if you're about to lose your life, then you have an obligation to eat what you can, even if it is haram, drink what you can, even if it is haram. So we talked a lot about that because of, it's in the books of fiqh, and it shows you a couple of things. Number one, it shows you the importance of the preservation of life and the sanctity of life, which was one of the maqasid. So in the order of legal thinking, the maqsad, the first meta principle, the preservation of life trumps everything else. If life is going to be threatened, then we have to do everything and anything to preserve life. Number two, it shows you how a jurist, how a faqih thinks. This is not like a tangent that's off topic. This is the topic itself to show you the order of thinking, and then he gives you scenario after scenario, even if it is you have to engage in cannibalism, even if you have to cut off part of your own body to eat it. That's the dire, to show you what dire circumstance means. So it's a graphic discussion, but it's a discussion that shows us kind of the genius of the legal thinking of the Islamic law, from both the principles point, the jurisprudence, the usul point of view, and the furu'a, the positive law that we're studying together. Then we talked about fish and locust. I mean, the spleen and the liver, that's kind of doesn't need much commentary. But the fish, that's important to also understand to show you how they have tasawwur, how they were able to capture and imagine what could come from the sea. As long as it comes from the sea, it's permissible to eat. And the locust is also one of the hikmas, one of the wisdoms we learned is the Sharia being biased towards those that are less fortunate and making things easy for them. And then we began the discussion of the udhiyah, of the sacrificial animal, knowing that it's a sunnah for us, sunnah mu'akkada, something that we should do if we can, and it's disliked to leave it if we were able to. And inshallah, the details of that discussion, that will come in the next lecture, which we'll get into actually what are the animals that satisfy that sunnah. والحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى اللهم على سيدنا مولانا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم.